When I was an undergraduate, I had to pick a dissertation topic for my third year of my history degree, and I thought I wanted to do the Boston Tea Party, but then I went to an exhibition at the Imperial War Museum that changed my mind, and there were two items in particular in the exhibition that really intrigued me. The exhibition was on Secret War, and there was a dress and a bloodstained satchel. So I read the information next to the items and discovered that they belonged to an SOE agent named Yvonne Cormeau. The SOE was the Special Operations Executive, and Yvonne had been dropped behind enemy lines in occupied France. She'd been shot in the leg while trying to escape a German roadblock, hence the bloodstained satchel and her bullet-holed dress. Yvonne's story really intrigued me, particularly the occasion where she managed to convince a German police blockade that she was actually a medic carrying an X-ray machine, when in fact her suitcase had a wireless set in it that she was using to transmit information back to the British in London. I was hooked, and I thought, I need to do the Special Operations Executive, particularly as women agents, for my undergraduate dissertation, so I switched. Upon further investigation, I discovered that several of the women who had served with the SOE had also been members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, or the WAAF. When I dug further, I discovered that the WAAF had also been involved in various forms of intelligence work behind the RAF's operations during the Second World War, and I decided that I needed to look further into that in a master's degree.
So what was the WAAF? Well, it was exactly what it sounds like. It was a woman's version of a military service pertaining to air power and defence. A version of it, called the Women's Royal Air Force, had existed in the First World War for much the same reason, to solve the manpower problem. With so many men being sent overseas to the fighting fronts, women were needed to work in the non-combatant roles left empty at home. So when war looked inevitable in June 1939, the King established the WAAF, designed to supply its parent organisation, the Royal Air Force, with airwomen to substitute for men wherever possible. By 1945, 250,000 women had served with the WAAF in over 110 different trades around the world. The ones that I was really interested in, though, seemed to be missing from the history of the WAAF as I worked my way through it. I'm talking about women like Yvonne Cormeau, those involved in secret work behind the scenes.
So I began to dig.
I didn't realise when I started digging that it would take me 5 years and a lot of hard work to research and write the story of these women who were missing from history. If I had, it wouldn't have stopped me, because what I found was so worth it. I had to piece together their stories by using official records at the National Archives at Kew, personal and private memories and correspondence, interviews, oral history, and lots of other sources. History is often not kind to the memory of women, and sometimes when recovering their stories, we have to get creative with where we look for information. The deeper I dug, the more I found. There were WAAF involved in all kinds of intelligence work, in fighter command, bomber command, in signals intelligence listening to enemy messages, at Bletchley Park, the home of the codebreakers, in aerial reconnaissance intelligence, and even helping to plan Operation Chastise, the Dambusters Raid. Why then have they all been missing from our history books for so long?
Most of us have heard of the few. The famous fighter pilots with RAF Fighter Command who very bravely flew Hurricanes and Spitfires and other aircraft throughout the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940. They are rightly revered, their courage was incredible. The people we haven't heard of, though, are those who work behind the scenes to collect, analyse and disseminate intelligence that the few often relied upon to be successful in the air. Many of those people were members of the WAAF. These women have remained hidden behind the few in history, and that is why I decided to write their story. I'm particularly interested in the subjective or lived experiences of people during wartime, And I'm especially interested in those experiences when it comes to women and groups of people who have been traditionally overlooked. One of the ways of investigating that type of history is to come to locations where these people spent their time during the war. So, for instance, today I'm in Dover. All along the south coast, women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force were working in radar stations, radio direction finding stations, watching Luftwaffe raids come in across the channel. It's cold, it's windy, it's gusty. I can smell the sea in the air, and I'm able to imagine what that might have been like for them. Some of them were in caravans on top of these cliffs. One of them even blew over. Standing here on the white cliffs of Dover, it's mind-blowing that Britain was never invaded during the Second World War. France is so close. What would have been enemy-occupied territory is 22 miles across the water, and if you look behind me today, because it's clear, you can actually see the French coastline. WAAF report seeing, through binoculars, vehicles driving along the French coast, and they could see heavy gun placements, which they nicknamed Big Berthas. They've spoken about the terror that induced, knowing that they were in the firing line of weapons like that, knowing that if an invasion force did come, they were some of the first people it would encounter. They spoke about that fear in their diaries and in their memoirs. And there were other kinds of fears too. Dover was one of the most bombed places in the UK. So going to work every day, you knew that you could be maimed or killed in a bombing raid. It must have been terrifying to have to go to work and get on with your job knowing that those kinds of dangers existed.
At Secret History, we've been working to bring these women out of the shadows and place them where they belong in the narrative of the Second World War. To do so, we've travelled to some of the places where they worked, filming at locations that were extremely secret for decades. The series will accompany the release of my new book, The Women Behind the Few. We'll journey to where the WAAF worked, thinking about how they lived through and experienced the war going on around them.
Catch this series to find out more about the women who worked throughout the Second World War to keep the RAF supplied with vital intelligence that kept it flying and kept it where it needed to be at exactly the right time. These women experienced extraordinary things and made an incredible contribution to the Allied war effort, and this is their story.